For 19 years, I was the reason our biggest customer never knew how close we came. Something went wrong in that warehouse every single week, and every single week I fixed it before anyone upstairs felt a thing. Then the company hired a man named Craig Keller to make us efficient, and Craig told me to follow the process to the letter. No exceptions, ever. He said it out loud in a meeting, and then, because he loved a paper trail almost as much as I do, he put it in an email. I printed that email. What happened next is the most expensive thing I have ever watched. And I want you to understand from the very start that I watched every minute of it on purpose. My name is Gail Sutton, and for most of my life my job did not have a name that meant anything to people at parties. I ran transportation and logistics for a company called Marin, which has made deeply unglamorous household goods since before I was born. Trash cans, dish racks, the plastic bins your holiday decorations sleep in 11 months out of 12. Nobody dreams of this work, but somebody has to get 200,000 dish racks from a plant in Ohio onto exactly the right truck, to exactly the right dock, on exactly the right morning. And for a very long time, that somebody was me, and I was quietly, unshakably good at it. Here is the part almost nobody upstairs ever understood. A shipping schedule is not a machine that hums along by itself. It is a living thing that wakes up every morning and tries to die. A truck throws a rod on the interstate. A dock door freezes shut in January. A forklift punches a hole through a pallet of somebody's Christmas order. A driver quits at noon in a gas station parking lot and leaves a full trailer sitting in Indiana. My real job, the one hiding under the boring title, was catching those small catastrophes in the 10 minutes before they turned into large ones. Let me give you one example, so you know what kind of work we are talking about. Years ago, a February ice storm shut down half of Ohio. The same week, Brightway needed 40,000 storage totes on a dock in Tennessee. The routing program threw up its hands. The regular carrier canceled every load. I sat in my kitchen at 4 in the morning in my robe with a cold cup of coffee and a paper road map open on the counter like it was 1985. And I called every carrier I knew until I found 3 drivers willing to run a southern route around the ice. Those totes hit the dock on time. Nobody at Marin ever knew there had been a storm. That was the job. The job was that nobody knew. Our biggest account, by a wide margin, was a national chain called Brightway. At the end, nearly half of everything Marin made ended up under fluorescent lights on a Brightway shelf. And Brightway, like every giant retailer, kept a scorecard on its suppliers. On time and in full, they called it. For every case of goods that arrived late or arrived short, they charged you back 3% of what that case cost to produce. Miss enough delivery windows, and the fee stopped being a fee and quietly became a reason to go shopping for a supplier who could count. For 19 years, through ice storms and driver shortages and one genuinely memorable warehouse flood, Marin's Brightway score never once dropped below 98%. The retailer's own floor, the line below which the real punishment started, was 95. We lived comfortably above it year after year, and the people who signed my modest paycheck came to believe that was simply the natural state of the world. Shipments arrive on time the way the sun comes up. They did not think about it, because I had spent 2 decades making very sure they never had to. I should explain what that number meant to the people on the other end of it, because a scorecard is not really about numbers, it is about trust. A buyer at a chain that size is juggling hundreds of suppliers, and the ones she keeps are the ones who never make her look bad. Our buyer, over the years, had learned that Marin simply worked. She could put us on an end cap for a big holiday and never once lie awake wondering whether the totes would land. That reputation took 19 years to build, one on-time truck at a time. It is the kind of thing that is agonizingly slow to earn and, as I was about to learn, breathtakingly fast to spend. The score stayed where it was because of 100 small things that appeared in no policy binder anywhere. When a load was about to miss its must-arrive-by date, I did not fill out a form and wait for the universe to bless it. I picked up the phone. I had a regional carrier, a good one, run by people who actually answered on the second ring. My guy over there was named Lewis. If I called Lewis at 6 in the morning and told him I had a hot load bound for a Brightway dock, Lewis did not ask me for a purchase order number. Lewis found me a truck. It cost a little more up front. It saved us an absolute fortune. That was the entire trick. There were a dozen tricks in that same family, and every one of them was a judgment call. When the routing program tried to save $9 by putting a time-sensitive load on a slow lane, I overrode it. When a driver hit a wall of traffic outside Atlanta, I called the scheduler at the Brightway distribution center directly, a woman I had known for the better part of a decade, and asked her, one tired person to another, to slide our delivery appointment by 2 hours. None of this was in a manual. None of it could be. It was 2 decades of knowing which rules were load-bearing and which ones were only there for decoration. I am 54 years old. I live alone with a beagle named Pretzel, who has never, in 9 years, obeyed a single instruction I have given him, a fact I mention because it turns out to be relevant to how all of this ends. I liked my work. I was not paid especially well for it, and I had made a private peace with that, the way people do. The paycheck was thin, but I was the one who made the impossible truck appear out of nothing. There is a real, quiet pride in being the person who can. What I did not understand, until a man arrived determined to prove otherwise, was how badly I had been waiting for somebody to simply notice. That man was Craig Keller. The year before, Marin had taken on outside investors, the kind who buy a quiet family company and immediately decide it ought to be less quiet and less family. They wanted Marin to look like a serious modern operation, so they hired Craig as our new director of operations. He was 41. He had come up through consulting, and he carried his laptop through the warehouse the way a sheriff carries a badge. He said the word process the way other people say please or amen. On his very first day, he gathered us in the break room and announced, with real feeling, that we were finally going to professionalize. I want to be fair to Craig, because a caricature is too easy, and this actually happened. He was not stupid. He was, in his own way, sincere. He genuinely believed that any problem a company had could be solved by writing a cleaner process and forcing everyone to follow it. He talked about a single source of truth. He talked about spend under management. He looked at a company that had shipped reliably for 40 years and saw not a functioning organism, but a mess of undocumented habits waiting to be cleaned up. And he was not entirely wrong that we ran on undocumented habits. He was only wrong, catastrophically, about what those habits were worth. It took Craig about 3 weeks to find me. To be precise, it took him 3 weeks to find the expedited freight line on the monthly budget, the money I quietly spent on Luis and his second-ring trucks. To me, that line was the cheapest insurance policy in the entire company. To Craig, it was a wound. He called it maverick spend, which is a genuine term consultants use for money that gets spent outside the official channels, as though the channel were the point and the shipment arriving on time were a minor administrative detail. He called me into his office, turned his laptop toward me like a prosecutor presenting an exhibit, and asked why I had authorized expedited freight nearly every week for years without a single purchase order. There was a pause in that conversation I have never quite forgotten. He asked, in the careful voice people use when they are accusing you of something they do not want to say out loud, whether I had any personal relationship with the carrier I kept using. Whether there was any reason, he said, that I steered so much business to one vendor. He was asking, without asking, whether I was taking money. 19 years of saving that company its own contract, and the new man wanted to know if I was on the take. I did not slam anything. I just looked at him for a long moment and said, "No, Craig. I steer business to Luis because Luis answers his phone. You should try it sometime." Then I explained the whole thing to him, patiently, the way you explain water to a fish. "The expedites are what hold the Brightway score up," I said. "Every dollar we spend rushing a load at risk saves us many more in chargebacks, and keeps the biggest account in the building. This is not waste. This is the opposite of waste. It has worked for 19 years. Craig listened with the expression of a man politely waiting for you to stop making noise so that he can begin talking. When I finished, he said the sentence I would hear, in one costume or another, for the next 2 months. If the process cannot handle it, then the process is not the problem. The new rules arrived as a memo because Craig believed in memos the way some people believe in prayer. Every expedite would now require a purchase order and 3 separate approvals, one of which was his. Every carrier move had to route through a national freight broker the investors had a standing deal with, a web portal called Vantage, and there would be no more calling Luis or anybody else directly, ever. No more overriding the routing program, and, in a line I read 3 times to be sure I had understood it, no more unauthorized contact with customer personnel. Every shortcut I owned, every lifeline, was named and killed on a single page. And each one of them was a reason the score had never dropped. The rest of the team read that memo the way you read a weather warning for a storm still a day out. Tyler, the young coordinator I had spent 2 years training, brought his copy to my desk with his eyebrows somewhere up near his hairline. "Gail," he said, "this says we can't call the carriers. How are we supposed to fix anything?" I told him the truth, which was that according to this memo, we were no longer supposed to fix anything. We were supposed to file a form and let the process fix it. He laughed because he thought I was joking. I was not joking. That was the whole problem, and it would take a lost contract to make anyone but me see it. The warehouse floor understood before the offices did. Warehouse people always do. They are closest to the metal. The dock crew watched loads that used to fly straight out the door start backing up against the wall, waiting on approvals that lived in somebody's inbox. And they knew, the way you know weather in your knees, that something had gone wrong at the top. One of the older loaders, a man who had been throwing freight since before Craig was born, stopped me by the coffee machine and asked, low, "Are they really making you wait 2 days to move a hot load now?" I told him yes. He shook his head once, the way you do at a thing too dumb to argue with, and went back to the dock. I did not argue in that meeting. I have never once in my life solved a real problem by arguing in a meeting. Instead, I did something quieter and, as it turned out, far more powerful. That same afternoon, I sent Craig an email. I wrote that I understood the new policy completely and intended to follow it exactly, and that I only wanted to confirm one thing in writing, so that there could be no confusion down the road. I asked him, in plain words, to be clear, this policy has no exceptions, even when a shipment is about to miss a Brightway must arrive by date and trigger a chargeback. I wanted it said out loud, in writing, in a place where it could never be unsaid. Craig replied in 4 minutes. I have that email still, and I will have it until I die. Correct, he wrote. No exceptions, ever. Stop making unauthorized decisions and follow the process. That was the entire message. No exceptions ever. Stop making unauthorized decisions and follow the process. I read it twice, slowly. And then I made a decision that I need you to understand precisely, because it is the moral center of this whole thing, and people get it wrong. I did not decide to sabotage the company. I decided to stop rescuing a company that had just informed me, in writing, that my rescues were the crime. I know what some of you are thinking, because I have thought it too at 3 in the morning. Why not march straight over Craig's head to the president and explain exactly what was about to happen? I will tell you why. Because I was a 54-year-old lifer with no title and no leverage, and Craig was the shiny new director the investors had personally installed to modernize us. If I had gone around him in week 1, I would not have been the wise veteran sounding the alarm. I would have been the difficult old-timer who could not adapt, and I would have been managed out by spring. I had warned him, clearly, in writing. That was the honest limit of my power, and I knew it. I thought about quitting, too. I want you to know that. I sat in my kitchen more than one night that month with Pretzel's chin resting on my foot and turned it over and over. I could have simply walked, taken my 19 years and my second-ring phone numbers and gone to work for a competitor, and Marin would have discovered my value the same way, through its sudden absence. But I had built that logistics operation. It was mine in every way that mattered except the ones that showed up on a paycheck. I did not want to hand it over to a man with a binder. I wanted it back. And the only road back ran directly through letting Craig be exactly as right as he insisted he was. So I followed the process, to the letter. This is the part of the story where people lean in, expecting me to describe some brilliant act of sabotage, and I'm always a little sorry to disappoint them. I did not sabotage one single thing. I did the exact opposite. I did precisely, only and entirely what I had been instructed to do. When a load was at risk, I did not call Louis. I filed a requisition, I attached it for its 3 blessings, and I waited. I let the small disasters unfold at their own natural speed, the unhurried speed they always would have moved at, in a world where I had never existed. I did keep one old habit alive. For 19 years, I had maintained a private spreadsheet where I logged every shipment that needed rescuing, because that is simply how a person gets better at rescuing them. I did not stop keeping it. I only changed the final column. Where I used to record how I had saved each load, I now recorded the precise time I filed the requisition, the precise time each approval came back, if it ever came back at all, and the exact sentence I had sent flagging that the shipment was going to be late. I kept calling the file what I had always called it, my exceptions log. In 19 years, it had never once been so complete or so quietly damning. I will be honest about the cost of it to me, because this story is a lie without it. It hurt. I had spent half of my life being the person who made the trucks appear, and now I sat at my own desk and watched them fail to appear, on purpose, and something behind my ribs ached through every hour of it. Tyler kept coming to my desk, because Tyler still believed, at 26, that being good at your job was rewarded. "Gail," he would say, "the Brightway load is going to miss, should I get it expedited?" And every time I would answer, "Not without 3 approvals, Tyler," he would stare at me like I had lost my mind. I could not explain it to him yet. I just told him to file the paperwork and let it ride. The first one missed on a Thursday. It was a load of storage totes headed for a Brightway distribution center in Georgia, the kind of run I would ordinarily have handed to Luis over the phone before my second cup of coffee. Instead, I filed the requisition at 7:15 in the morning, and I waited. Procurement approved it by noon. Finance approved it late that afternoon. Craig approved it at 9 the following morning, because Craig was away at an off-site, learning, I can only assume, to be a better leader. By the time the expedite was finally authorized, the only truck that could have made the date had already left without it. The load arrived a day and a half late. 3% of every case, charged straight back. I logged it, calmly, and moved on. The Vantage portal was its own special comedy. It was slower than a phone call by roughly a full day, and it did not know our lanes or our docks the way Luis knew them in his sleep. The first time I routed a time-critical load through it, exactly as required, the broker assigned a carrier who picked the load up, drove it to the wrong cross-dock 2 states away, and let it sit there through the entire weekend. In full, that other scorecard word, means the whole order has to arrive together, as one. Half of ours got there Monday, the other half straggled in Wednesday. Both halves were late. I was not authorized to call anyone and fix it, so I did not. I logged that one too. The third one was almost elegant, in a way that only I could appreciate. A rush order came through, and the routing program, left to its own unsupervised judgment for the first time in years, chose a lane based purely on price. It selected a carrier whose transit time was 2 days too slow for the window, because the program does not know what a window is. It only knows what a dollar is. In the old world, I would have caught that in about 4 seconds and rerouted it before lunch. In the new world, catching it was overriding the system, and overriding the system was forbidden. So I let the cheapest possible truck carry our most urgent possible load, exactly as designed, straight into a wall. I want to be clear about what I felt by then, because it was not triumph. It was closer to the feeling of watching a slow car accident you had tried, twice in writing, to prevent. Every failed load was a small private grief. But every failed load was also a line in my log, time-stamped and undeniable. And somewhere underneath the grief, a colder part of me knew exactly what all those lines were going to add up to. Craig believed the story was about saving money. He did not yet understand that I was the one keeping score, and that I had never once in 19 years lost count. It went on like that, load after load, week after week. A shipment short by 100 cases because the system split it wrong and I was not allowed to catch it. A truck sent to the entirely wrong distribution center because the portal had stale address data and correcting it counted as unauthorized. Each incident on its own was survivable. Stacked together, week over week, they were an avalanche moving in slow motion, and I had a front row seat and a spreadsheet. Every single one got its line. The requisition time, the approval delay, my written warning, ignored. I was not building a case exactly. I was only keeping records, the way I always had. But a complete enough record has a way of becoming a case whether you meant it to or not. Here is a thing about a score that has held at 98% for 19 straight years. When it finally begins to slide, it slides quietly at first, and the only soul in the building who notices is the one who used to hold it up with both hands. I noticed in the second week. Craig did not. Craig was in his office, assembling a slide deck about how much money he had heroically cut from the expedited freight line, a real and true number, a few $1,000s a month, $40,000 a year if you rounded up and squinted. He carried that number up to the president like a cat presenting a dead bird on the welcome mat. Look what I saved you. Nobody had yet run the other half of the arithmetic. There was one moment I think about more than all the rest. 2 weeks into the collapse, Craig stopped by my desk, looked over my neat stack of filed requisitions and my perfectly documented approvals, and told me, with what I honestly believe was real warmth, that he was pleased. "You have really come around, Gail," he said. "This is what disciplined execution looks like." I thanked him. I did not mention that the disciplined execution he was admiring was, at that very moment, 3 loads deep in missing its dates, or that his praise was going straight into a log with a timestamp on it. I only said, "I am just following the process, Craig." And I was. That was the whole terrible joke of it. Luis called me, in the middle of all this, on my cell phone, because I had gone silent on him for the first time in 19 years. "Gail," he said, "did I do something wrong?" The phone just stopped ringing. I stood in the warehouse parking lot with the wind cutting through my coat, and I could not tell him the truth. That I had been ordered to stop calling him, and had decided, for once in my life, to obey an order all the way to the bottom. So I just said, "It's not you, Luis, it's a new process." He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "That's a shame, because your loads always showed up right." Then he wished me well and hung up, and I stood out there in the cold feeling every one of my 54 years. By the end of the first full month, the Brightway score had fallen from 98 to just under 91. That does not sound like a cliff until you remember that 95 was the floor, the line below which the chargebacks stop being an annoyance and turn into a flood. The first monthly bill from Brightway landed in the finance department like a slap across the face. In a single month, the chargebacks alone came to more than Craig had saved on expedited freight in an entire year. And that, I already knew, was only the small bill. The enormous one had not even arrived yet. I had it all in my log, line by line, time-stamped, waiting. If you are wondering whether I felt any guilt as that bill came due, the honest answer is that mostly I felt calm. I had warned them. More than that, I had it in writing that I had warned them, sitting in my saved mail like a loaded and perfectly legal weapon. I'm going to tell you about that email one more time before we are done, the 4-minute reply, because it is the reason this story ends where it does, and not in my quiet resignation. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and you really should get to watch Craig try to pin all of this on me first. He did try. It did not go the way he had planned. The best part is a single sentence, and the beautiful thing is that he wrote it himself. The account belonged, on paper, to a woman named Dana, who ran sales. Brightway was the biggest number on Dana's page, the figure her entire year was measured against. Early on, when the score first wobbled, Dana had waved it off. She had assumed, the way everyone always assumed, that logistics would quietly sort it out the way logistics always had. That was the assumption the whole company was built on. And it was the assumption I had spent 19 years earning and was now, deliberately, no longer meeting. By the time Dana stopped assuming, Brightway's buyer was already calling her twice a week, and the word review had entered the conversation. Dana came to my desk on a Tuesday, wound so tight she was nearly vibrating, and asked me what in God's name was happening down in logistics, because in 19 years, Brightway had never so much as raised an eyebrow, and now they were openly talking about putting Marin under review. I did not defend myself. I had been waiting, honestly, for somebody to finally ask the right person the right question. So I turned my monitor toward her, and I opened the log. Dana is not a slow woman. She read in silence for about 90 seconds, and I watched the color of her face change one careful shade at a time. She saw the requisitions, sitting there for 2 full days apiece, waiting on approvals that trickled in whenever 3 busy men got around to them. She saw every single load I had flagged, in advance, in writing, as going to be late, with the exact minute I had raised the flag. And then she saw the email, my careful question, and Craig's 4-minute answer. No exceptions, ever stop making unauthorized decisions and follow the process. Dana read that line, sat back slowly in my spare chair, and said a word I will not repeat in polite company. Then she said a much quieter one. He put that in writing, she said. It was not really a question. He loves a paper trail, I told her, almost as much as I do. Before they left us, Brightway did the thing that big retailers always do right before they leave. They sent a formal letter placing Marin under supplier review, a cold document that lists every failure with a date beside it and asks, without warmth, for a corrective action plan. Dana brought that letter to me because of course she did. There was no one else in the building who could actually read it. And the strange, quiet joy of that afternoon was that Brightway's list of our failures and my exceptions log matched, line for line, date for date. Their letter was the prosecution's evidence. My log was that same evidence, with one extra column they did not have. The name of the man who had ordered every single failure, in writing. Brightway did not scream. The giant retailers never scream. Screaming is for people who still hope. They simply, quietly, decline to renew. At the next contract cycle, their buyer informed Dana that Brightway would be shifting the bulk of its business to a different supplier the following quarter, citing in one cool word, reliability. Reliability. Nearly half of Marin's revenue, the account I had personally carried above the line through 2 decades of storms, walked out the door inside a single email shorter than the one Craig had sent me. Killing the expedites had saved the company roughly $40,000 a year. Losing Brightway cost it several million. That is the entire equation. It had taken about 1 month to solve. There was a meeting after the news landed. The kind of meeting with the president actually in the room. Ron Marin, whose own father's name was bolted to the front of the building, sat at the head of the table and wanted to know, reasonably, how a company that had shipped like clockwork for 40 years had managed to lose its single largest customer in 1 quarter. Craig came prepared. Craig always came prepared. He had a slide deck, and he spoke, with confidence, about legacy processes and execution gaps and a logistics function that had, in his telling, stubbornly resisted modernization. He gestured, more than once, in my general direction. I let him talk. I have always believed a man should be allowed to finish. When he was done, Dana slid a plain manila folder down the length of the table and said, quietly, "Gail has something the room should see." I did not stand up and give a speech. I am not a speech kind of person. I opened my log on the screen and I walked them through it, one shipment at a time, in the flattest voice I own. Here is the load. Here is the minute I filed the requisition. Here is where it sat for 2 days, waiting. Here is where I flagged, in writing, that it would be late. And then I put the last email up on the screen, my question and Craig's reply, side by side, in letters large enough to read from the head of the table. To confirm, no exceptions, even when we are going to miss a Brightway date. Correct, no exceptions, ever. Stop making unauthorized decisions and follow the process. I did not add a single word of my own. I did not need to. The room went very quiet, and it was a specific kind of quiet that I had been waiting 19 years to hear. The quiet of a group of powerful people, all doing the same painful arithmetic in their heads at the same instant, and all arriving together at the same answer. The number at the bottom of that arithmetic had Craig's name on it, in his own writing, sent in 4 minutes. Craig tried, of course. He said the policy had obviously been misunderstood, taken far too literally, that naturally he had never meant for anyone to actually lose the account. And that was the precise instant the whole thing turned over, because every person at that table had just read the words, "No exceptions, ever," in Craig's own writing, sent in direct reply to a direct question about missing Brightway dates. There is no misunderstanding a sentence built that plainly. For 2 solid months, he had told anyone who would listen that human judgment was the enemy of good process. He had finally gotten the company he asked for, one that ran on process alone, with all judgment surgically removed. It cost several $1 million a quarter to operate. The people who signed the checks had noticed at last. Craig was not marched out of the building that afternoon. Companies almost never move that cleanly. But the great Professionalize Everything initiative went very quiet, very fast, and roughly 6 weeks later, there was a short, bloodless announcement that Craig had decided to pursue other opportunities, which is the language a company uses for a decision made entirely without the person's input. I did not celebrate. I want to be truthful about that. I had watched something I built with my own 2 decades get broken on purpose, and being completely right about why did not fully touch the ache of having watched it. But it touched some of it. And the quiet in that meeting had been worth a great deal. Here is what happened next, which is genuinely the part I would want if I were the one listening. About a week after Craig went off to pursue his opportunities, Ron Maron himself walked all the way down to my desk, the president. In 19 years, I am not certain he had ever once known which desk in that building was mine. He lowered himself into the spare chair, the one Tyler usually collapsed into, and he asked me, with real and visible awkwardness, whether I would be willing to, and I am quoting the man exactly, start using my judgment again. Those were his words, use your judgment again. I had been formally forbidden from using my judgment only a few months earlier, on the grounds that it was unauthorized. Now the president of the company was in my spare chair, asking for it back. I said, yes, but not for free, and not the way it had been before. I had spent 19 years as the invisible reason the trucks kept showing up, and I had discovered, somewhere in that long, ugly month, that I was completely finished being invisible. So I asked for things, and I asked for them in writing, because by then I had developed a deep and abiding respect for things in writing. A real title, Director of Logistics. Written authority to expedite an at-risk load up to a set dollar amount without begging 3 separate men for their signatures. My judgment, in plain words, written into official policy instead of treated as a small crime. And a salary that finally reflected what that judgment was actually worth to them. They said yes to every last item. It is genuinely remarkable what a company will agree to in the quarter right after it has thrown away several $1 million it never needed to lose. I had asked, for 19 years, in 100 small, quiet ways, to be seen. It turned out that the thing which finally got me seen was letting them watch, in high definition, exactly what the world looked like without me quietly holding it up. I do not recommend the method to just anyone. It only works if you are, in fact, the one holding it up. But if you are, there is nothing on this earth quite as persuasive as your own sudden, complete, and well-documented absence. The very first thing I did with my new authority was almost petty, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. I wrote a one-page policy of my own and had it added to the very binder Craig had loved so much. It said, in plain language, that the logistics director may expedite any at-risk shipment on her own signature, and that doing so is not maverick spend, but the job performing exactly as designed. I put it right there in the single source of truth. Then I went back to work, which now looked precisely like the work I had always done, the phone calls and the judgment and the second-ring trucks, except that this time it had a title on it, and a number behind it, and, at long last, permission. A year later now, the trucks show up on time again. I brought Luis back the very first week. He answered on the second ring, the way he always had, and told me dryly that he had wondered where I had wandered off to. The Brightway account is not all the way back, because you do not simply unlose a customer that size, but we have clawed back a healthy piece of it by proving, over 2 solid quarters, that Marin is reliable again. And reliable, I have come to believe, is just judgment with a paycheck attached to it. Tyler took over my old seat and finally learned the lesson I could not say out loud to him that miserable spring, which is that a process is a floor to stand on, never a ceiling to hide beneath, and that the entire job lives in the open air above it. The best afternoon of the whole year came about 8 months in. Brightway's buyer, the same one whose cool little email had cost us millions, called Dana to say they wanted to trial Marin again on a seasonal program, a small piece of business, a test. Dana walked it back to me instead of just accepting it and asked, plainly, "Can we hold the score if they come back?" I told her yes, and this time I could actually promise it, because this time the exceptions were mine to make. We held it at 99 that quarter. The buyer noticed. Trust, it turns out, works a great deal like a score, very slow to rebuild and worth every slow inch of it. As for Craig, the last I heard he had landed on his feet at another company, in another city, optimizing their processes and hunting down their maverick spend. I hope, with genuine sincerity, that somebody over there is keeping a careful exceptions log. Somewhere in that building, there is almost certainly a person answering the phone on the second ring, doing the quiet, unglamorous, technically unauthorized work of catching the small disasters before they grow into large ones, and getting told at this very moment to knock it off and trust the process. I hope, for that company's sake, that their person is either a good deal less patient than I was, or a great deal more. Strange as it sounds, either one would save them. I still have the printed email. It lives in a desk drawer, not up on a wall, because I am not the sort of woman who frames a thing like that. But I keep it, because it remains the single most expensive sentence I have ever laid eyes on. 11 words. No exceptions, ever. Stop making unauthorized decisions and follow the process. 11 words that cost a company several $1 million, all because the man who typed them was completely certain that the people doing the quiet work were a cost to be trimmed, rather than the very thing holding the whole fragile schedule up off the floor. Every company on this earth has a me in it somewhere. A rare few of them are lucky enough to notice before they put it in writing. That is the whole story. Pretzel, my beagle, has still never once followed a rule in his life, and he remains the single most contented creature I have ever known, which at this point I have decided cannot possibly be a coincidence. Rules keep a warehouse standing upright. Judgment keeps it actually running. You need the both of them, and the only real trick, the whole art of the thing, is knowing in each moment which one that moment is asking for. I spent 19 years knowing that in my bones, and never getting paid one nickel for the knowing. Now it is written into my title and my contract and, heaven help them, their process. It turned out the exception was the job all along. If you rode with me all the way to here, thank you for that, truly. I would honestly love to know what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have quietly kept on saving a company that told you, in writing, that your saving was the problem? Would you have done what I did and simply let the process speak in its own loud voice? Or would you have marched straight up to the president on the very first day and blown the whole whistle? Be honest, because I still turn it over some nights myself. Leave a comment and tell me your state and your age while you are down there, since I am always curious where you all are listening from. And if this one kept you good company for a while, go ahead and hit like and subscribe, and I will meet you in the very next story.